to welcome you to this ceremony marking the inauguration of the Marion and David Handleman Research Professorship in Vascular Surgery and the installation of Dr. Jim Stanley as the first Handleman professor. I'd first like to welcome our special guests, starting with Dr. Bob Kelch, the Executive Vice President of Medical Affairs. Also with us are Gil Oman, the previous EVPMA. Gil, thank you for being here. And pleased to see Robin Fleming, the former president of the University of Michigan. Mr. Fleming, thank you so much for joining us. We welcome Jim Stanley and his family, wife Nancy, sons Tim and Jeff, daughter and son-in-law Sarah and Ray Russo, brother Robert Stanley, niece Susan. It's wonderful to have the ingathering of the Stanley family from all over the country to be here today. And also a special welcome to David and Charlene Handleman. Thank you so much for what you have done. I'd like to start out by taking a few moments to tell you about how this professorship came into being and the lives and careers of its benefactors and recipient. Marion and David Handleman were married in 1941 and shared their lives together until Marion passed away in 1999 after courageously withstanding a series of illnesses. And what a full life they led. Besides raising their children, Judy and Alan, the couple found time to be great friends to the arts community and many community organizations. Marion and David served on numerous boards for a range of nonprofit organizations, many of which commemorate the Handleman's philanthropy through halls or programs bearing their name. David Handleman has had a stellar career in business, guiding the family company from a wholesale pharmaceutical business to his current status as the leading distributor of recorded music in North America. As an alumna of the university, it's perhaps fitting that Marion took advanced treatment here at the University of Michigan under the care of Dr. Stanley. The Handleman's gratitude for the attention she received led to the establishment of the Marion and David Handleman Research Professorship in Vascular Surgery that we celebrate today. Dr. Jim Stanley received both his undergraduate and medical degrees here at Michigan and completed his residency here. He is a renowned vascular surgeon. His extensive clinical practice focuses on complex cerebrovascular and aortic disease, renovascular hypertension, splanchnic aneurysms, and pediatric arterial diseases. After an internship at Philadelphia General Hospital, he served as a medical officer at Brooke Army Medical Center in Texas. His residency at the U-M included 2 years as an NIH trainee in academic surgery. Jim joined our faculty in 1972 as an instructor, making his way through the ranks to full professor by 1980. He was head of the vascular surgery service for more than 10 years and of the vascular surgery section for almost 20 years. He has served as both director of medical student education and director of residency education in general surgery. And since 1982, he has been the vascular surgery fellowship director. He was also director of the Jobst Vascular Research Laboratories for 15 years. In 2003, we appointed Jim as the Cardiovascular Center's director for vascular surgery. He is the author of 10 books, more than 470 scientific articles and textbook chapters, and has served as the editor of the Journal of Vascular Surgery for 5 years. He has received numerous honors and awards, including an NIH Vascular Disease Academic Award, which provided the impetus for the university's multidisciplinary vascular medicine program, the first Conrad Jobst Award for Research in Vascular Surgery, the university's Distinguished Service Award, the Medical Center Alumni Distinguished Achievement Award. He is an honorary fellow in the Royal College of Surgeons, Edinburgh, and an honorary member of the National Academy of Medicine of Columbia, an honorary member of the Royal Australasian College of Surgeons, Section of Vascular Surgery. He is a member of 30 learned societies and has served as an officer in many, including president of the Society of Vascular Surgery. The Marion and David Handleman Research Professorship in Vascular Surgery will support Dr. Stanley as he continues his brilliant career as a clinician and a researcher here at Michigan. We will spend some time in this ceremony congratulating Dr. Stanley on his installation to this professorship and to give our thanks again to the Handlemans for generously endowing it. And we have a couple of speakers to talk about Jim and the importance of this professorship. And I'd like to start by asking Dr. Thomas Wakefield, the S. Martin Lindenauer Collegiate Professor of Vascular Surgery and the head of the Section of Vascular Surgery, to begin. Dr. Wakefield.
Well, today we honor Jim Stanley, Marion and David Handleman, the Section of Vascular Surgery, the Department of Surgery, and the University of Michigan. I am extremely proud to stand before you as the head of vascular surgery and introduce James C. Stanley as the Marion and David Handleman Research Professor in the Section of Vascular Surgery at the University of Michigan. I want to thank David from all of vascular surgery for his generosity and great gift that makes this day and event possible. Now, Jim Stanley is true blue. As Dr. Lichter said, he attended U of M as an undergraduate and as a medical student. Even at the young age of 1.5 years, he knew he wanted to attend U of M. Jim was an intern at Philadelphia General Hospital and then served as a medical officer at Brooke Army Medical Center. He completed surgical residency at U of M in 1972, and then he quickly rose through the academic ranks. He was the head of vascular surgery for 28 years, from 1976 to 2004, and he is one of the co-directors of our beautiful new cardiovascular center, which is going up outside. Jim is the epitome of a triple threat academic surgeon, clinician, teacher, and researcher. First of all, he is a great surgeon. He is world-renowned for his expertise in renovascular hypertension and visceral artery aneurysm treatment. He is a tremendous teacher, and he was the recipient of a prestigious NIH Vascular Disease Academic Award, only one of 3 awarded in the entire country, that established our current vascular medicine program. And he was head and director of the Jobst Research Laboratory from 1989 until 2004, and he established this laboratory with a wonderful gift from Carolyn Jobst. And here you see Jim with Carolyn. His work on endothelial cell seeding of vascular grafts established his research legacy, but perhaps of greater importance was his work on gene transfection. He, along with Betsy Nabel, the current head of the NHLBI, first described the transfection of genetic material into the endothelial cells of a vessel in this article published in Science. He has authored or co-authored 475 publications. That's one paper or chapter every 25.4 days of his career, for those who are counting. And he's had 591 presentations, not including today's. He has been awarded numerous honors, including becoming an honorary fellow of the Royal College of Surgeons in Edinburgh in 1992, honorary member of the National Academy of Medicine of Columbia in 1994, an honorary member of the Royal Australasian College of Surgeons in 1995. Importantly and amazingly, 1 of every 8 vascular surgery program directors in this country have been trained by Jim. He has been president of our premier academic vascular organization, the Society for Vascular Surgery, and editor of our main journal, the Journal of Vascular Surgery. And I could go on and on. However, Jim will tell you that his greatest accomplishment is the raising of his family with his wonderful wife, Nancy. Nancy is the rock and foundation, and she has been the backbone of vascular surgery for many years. Nancy and Jim's 3 children are very accomplished. Sarah is a speech pathologist who, along with her husband Ray, lives in Gainesville, Florida. Jeff is an otolaryngologist who lives in Fargo, North Dakota with his wife Kate. And Tim lives in Stanford with his wife Stacy. Tim is a lawyer who has started a number of internet companies, the most famous being a company called FindLaw, which is a tremendous service to the legal community. So I'd ask Nancy, Sarah, Jeff, and Tim to stand up if you could and give him a hand. Jim has a number of other great interests outside of medicine. He has run the Boston Marathon, and here you see him finishing with Sarah, and he's run the New York Marathon. He is a great supporter of the arts, and he is an avid member of the University of Michigan Musical Society. And here is Jim and Nancy with their friends Maxim and Maria Shostakovich. He also loves Michigan football, as we all do. And here's a view from his seats, and I've had the opportunity to sit in his seats a number of times. Jim has been my teacher, mentor, boss, colleague, now faculty member, and always friend for 28 years. We are indeed fortunate that he has been with us to teach us all these years, and I am very proud of him today. Jim, congratulations.
Tom, thank you very much. You know, you see a lot of baby pictures, and sometimes you look and say, is that really the person? I've never seen a baby picture. It looks more like the adult turned out than that baby picture. Now I'd like to welcome to the podium Dr. Michael Mulholland, the Frederick A. College Distinguished Professor of Surgery, Chair of the Department of Surgery, to also make some remarks. Mike.
Thank you, Ellen. Hi, Jim. All great institutions develop a sense of identity. And this identity communicates a set of values, it dictates actions, it translates those actions into engagement with the world and sometimes into accomplishment. The university's identity is slow to develop, but if it's cherished, it can have a near permanence. And I think that the audience would agree with me that the University of Michigan, more than most places, has a sense of itself. It has an identity. But where does that come from? It'd be natural to say that the University of Michigan's identity derives from the Block M or Football Saturdays or the words or the spirit of the fight song, and that would be natural but wrong. A more subtle view might be that an institution's identity is reflective of how it chooses to use its resources. In this view, this university's sense of itself is bound by the enormous public investment in the Cardiovascular Center or by smaller private contributions to the U-M Musical Society. This understanding is also incorrect. An institution's identity is constituted only of people and of the values and the actions, the engagements, and the accomplishments that they express. If this is true, then some people have more impact than others. Greater influence accrues to those with a clear sense of purpose, an important but achievable goal, and the time and the energy to achieve that. Every university has a few people whose lives become entwined with that of the university, and that brings me to Jim Stanley. First time, Dr. Stanley came to the University of Michigan in 1956 as an undergraduate, and aside from his internship in the period of service to the Army Medical Corps, he's remained a part of this university for almost a half century. He's experienced the University of Michigan as an undergraduate, a medical student, a surgical trainee, a surgical practitioner, and for a long time now, as one of its most recognizable professors. This time of service provided Jim with a unique perspective on Michigan and a sense of continuity and of its values. Next, the goal. Dr. Stanley was among the first in this country to recognize the special expertise needed to care surgically for patients with vascular disorders. He became the most outstanding surgeon at Michigan in this area. He created our Section of Vascular Surgery. He developed our vascular residency. He established a Jobst Vascular Laboratory. In short, Dr. Stanley invented vascular surgery at Michigan, and his leadership made it the most academically successful unit in this country. Finally, a clear sense of purpose. Dr. Stanley sought to change our understanding of vascular disease. 15 years ago, in a uniquely collaborative effort, he developed the Vascular Medicine Program, which was a forward-looking initiative dedicated to the idea that vascular disorders were better anticipated by research and treated by medical therapy than by surgical operations. And this initial collaborative program became the foundation for the Cardiovascular Center, a compelling $200 million testament to Jim's idea. I hope you'll agree with me that a great university is not defined by its buildings, by its financial success, by national championships, or by scientific prizes. A great university is about people like Jim that invest their lives in education, in research, and in excellence. The University of Michigan derives its identity from people like Jim Stanley. Congratulations, Jim.
Mike, thank you very much. Our professorship inaugurations are marked by the presentation of medallions. And this one is engraved on the back. The inauguration ceremony, July 13, 2005, the Marion and David Handleman Research Professorship in Vascular Surgery. And Mr. Handleman, I want to come and present this to you. Dr. Stanley. This medallion is engraved, the inauguration ceremony, July 13, 2005, James C. Stanley MD, the Marion and David Handleman Research Professor in Vascular Surgery. Jim, congratulations.
Well, thank you all. This professorship really means more to me than any other academic accolade you really might imagine. Alan and Mike and Tom have been more than generous in their comments, and I've often thought that sometimes things get exaggerated when they say things, and today I know they get exaggerated. You've been very generous, and I appreciate it, and I know my family does. And David and Charlene, especially David, your gift to the university has really touched me deeply. I've known David for a better part of a decade and a half. It's the wonderful thing that this gift's going to outlast all of us in this room. It has a perpetuity that will cause it always to be there and always be a bridge to new knowledge and better patient care, better science. My thoughts the last few days have really been centered around boundaries. There are borders, words, and deeds that surround us all. They often give us apparent security, which we must pass through, however, to have a better understanding of the real world and often an opportunity to improve the human condition. There are some boundaries that are very difficult to define. In this day and age, we probably really will not be able to find them. They're almost undefinable, like the limits of our universe. And yet there do exist definitions of boundaries, two of which are really quite dissimilar. One refers to something that indicates limits, like staying within bounds in an athletic venture. You may be safe, but your view will always be limited if you stay in bounds. The other defines a frontier where a whole new perspective exists. And I believe this is really where research resides, and I think this is where research will be successful. I believe parents and teachers, mentors, especially at the University of Michigan, have a covenant to provide safety within boundaries, but an obligation to aid the young in leaving their comfort zones, approaching the boundaries so that they might discover new worlds that will improve our old world in both thought and substance. My parents and my brother took this seriously, and both of them had boundaries that I listened to carefully. This is my mother and my brother, who had more hair and curlier hair when this was taken, nearly 70 years ago. My mother in particular, and my brother, who was an artist, educated at Parsons in New York, really allowed me to express myself in being creative, both in drawing and writing. Writing's probably the only thing that's really survived. My father was a very successful business person in many rights. He was involved with municipal securities and bonds. He was a real guy. He was a great sportsman. He was a professional basketball player back in the 1920s and the author of some of my earliest boundaries. First, no gentleman C's. My father didn't care whether I had A's or set the curve, but he did not want me to accept being average. He never put pressure on me, but he really did not want me to be an average person. Second, like all kids, I wanted a new mitt or a new ball every season. And his admonition that equipment doesn't make the athlete really stuck. And you know he was right. And I've mentioned that more times than once to a lot of you in this audience who were trainees of mine when you're starting to scream at the nurses that you want a different instrument. And I keep saying, come on, George, whatever. Equipment doesn't make the athlete. Use what they give you. And I think it's true. Equipment makes a performer, but not the athlete. And lastly, he often let me step beyond boundaries. He allowed me to buy a car when I was 14 years old, $40 from a farmer that didn't have a drop of rust on it. We had a one-car garage, but he trusted me to do something with it, and he and I actually rebuilt it. It was a 32 Plymouth Coupe, rumble seat and all. This is when I wanted to be an engineer. And he allowed me to transfer out of engineering school to pre-med, and I was a very successful engineering school student. I was in the top 10% of my class. I can assure you I was never in the top 10% of my class as a pre-med student, and I'm not sure I would compete to get in school today, but he trusted me and he trusted my judgment. At age 8, I used to listen to 15-minute broadcasts from Little America by Admiral Byrd, and I was captivated by that. It encouraged me to think out of my own backyard growing up in East Lansing. And then at the age of 9, he took me over to Fairchild Theater in East Lansing when Admiral Byrd gave a lecture at night. And I actually had a chance to shake Admiral Byrd's hands that evening. And this is an autograph from his book, Alone, that's in our library at home. It's one of my more prized possessions. Admiral Byrd made 5 expeditions to Antarctica. And he was really my childhood hero. And there's no question, beyond his boundaries, there was great wonder, but there were also great hardships. There were no easy fixes in his life, and I think that that holds true for many of us. I've always wanted to go to Antarctica, and I've never been able to go, but I had a postcard, both the front and back of which had 2 penguins stamped on it, and it had a G and a T under it, and it came from George and Trudy Huebner when they went about 8 years ago, and they were both good friends of mine. Trudy was the 2nd woman regent of this university, and a phenomenal supporter of women's studies, and really brought womanhood, I think, into the academic foray. And their boundary was they went when they were in their 8th decade of life. And it wasn't a very big boundary for them, so there's still hope for me. I can get there. My wife, Nancy, and my children have also had significant boundaries. I was very lucky to marry my college sweetheart. It's a long time ago when I had more hair also. And she has been very important for the 44 years. She's protected me from myself, which has been no small feat. At the same time, she's guided our 3 children from being youngsters into being very, very successful young adults. They, with their spouses, have all pushed boundaries from my perspective, and I'd like to brag about them just a little bit if I can. Tim married Stacy. They are very well educated. Tim has 2 degrees from Stanford, computer science, engineering. He has a law degree from Michigan, finished up law last year at Harvard Law. Stacy has a degree from Stanford and a law degree from Harvard, and Tim had his PhD completed, but he did something before he actually defended his thesis. He started a company called Fine Law. He was the chairman and CEO, and Stacy was the president. It was the largest portal for law on the internet. And 2 years ago they sold it, and I know it's politically incorrect to talk about the sums, so I won't, but they did exceedingly well. And Tim always wanted to be a venture person and do something in high tech, and he succeeded. And they started another company, but he doesn't need venture capital this time. He can do it on his own. Jeff married Kate. Jeff all my kids have degrees, including my wife and I. We all have degrees from Michigan at some point or another. We got a big brick over at the stadium with all 5 of our names on it. And Jeff is a physician from University of Illinois. Kate graduated from the University of Iowa as a neonatologist, a pediatrician, and they're a superb couple. This is a photograph of their marriage. Jeff doesn't look a day older than he did when he was in junior high school, and this is a photograph about a month ago with Jeff and his group in North Dakota at a hospital that's almost as big as ours in Fargo. And Jeff, 13 days ago, was made the chief of the service there, and every time I look at him, I can't believe. And I know he looks young, but it's my wife's genes. It certainly is not mine. Sarah married Ray. Sarah has a degree from Michigan and master's in speech pathology from Northwestern. Ray had his undergraduate training at Brown and a master's and PhD in geology at Northwestern, was on the faculty there when he and Sarah met. And he is a geophysicist and is now on the faculty at the University of Florida. And they have presented us, they've expanded our family boundaries with Annie, who is our first grandchild. This is their marriage, and this is our young granddaughter, who's an absolute doll. I've been told that she's been exposed to early Einstein music as she approaches the age of 2. And when Ray joined the family, Ray joined with a dowry of 3,500 classic CDs, which just blows me away. And if any of you in the operating room get tired of Vivaldi or Dvorak or something like that, he's my source for the next round. All my kids have believed in competition. All were varsity athletes here in high school in Ann Arbor. And using running being the metaphor and yourself being the boundary, they really pushed themselves beyond the border of comfort. And within themselves, I think they developed a real sense of accomplishment and a real sense of self-being. Not by beating someone else, but by beating the best they could on their own. They ran marathons. This is Tim, he was the first. It's nearly 25 years ago. This is Sarah, she was the second. One of her 3 Boston marathons that she ran. She was clearly the best runner in the family. Came in 40th in Detroit when she was qualifying for this. So she's very good at it. And Kate and Jeff ran. This is also when they were finishing together, finishing the Boston Marathon, and they ran the Marine Corps together almost the same time. There's a lore about Boston, and much of it's around this man with the red shirt, Bill Rogers. Bill Rogers is here with my threesome. He's an Olympian, and he's run Boston enough times that his name's often synonymous with that marathon. The lore is also contagious. Sarah talked me into getting off the couch, and when I was in my 6th decade of life, I went out, lost weight, and started training, and I too ran Boston, and I finished it with Sarah. And then she got me this poster autographed by Bill Rogers with a wonderful caption: "The race is not always to the swift, but to those who keep on running." And I must tell you, I think that's just as true in life as it is in marathons. Bo actually got it right with his caption that those who stay will be champions. The many boundaries will melt away if you're persistent. And I think anyone that's run a marathon knows that it's a matter of being persistent, not necessarily always being swift. As to myself, I had many early boundaries. In high school, the good old times of Happy Days on television in the mid-50s, football was where the discipline hit the road. The rest of it was sort of fun. I grew up in East Lansing, and the man up here in the far corner with the suit on was my head coach, and probably, next to my father, had the greatest influence on my life, and probably still does. His name was Vince Carolot. He was high school coach for about 3 years after I played for him. I became head backfield coach at Michigan State, then head coach at Oklahoma State. And he had 3 rules, and they were real. And again, many of the residents have heard this in the operating room. First, winners don't quit and quitters don't win. Sort of similar to those that keep on running do well, or Bo's, those who stay will be champions. The second one was sweat, sacrifice, and a little extra effort. Last week, Alan came to the operating room about 9 o'clock in the morning, and Alan, we left about 9 o'clock at night, and we redid one anastomosis, and my fellow's comment was, I think we need to do this over, and he got it right. Sweat, sacrifice, and a little extra effort makes the difference at the end of the day. And lastly, gentlemen on and off the field, there were no shortcuts. Many of my students have heard this, and I think that these are wise adages. My kids used to hear it when they have a temper tantrum. I'd say winners don't quit and quitters don't win, but they were 3 years old, and I'm not sure they really understood what I was talking about. I mentioned I started college as an engineering school student, but I was soon influenced by this man. This is the cover slip of one of 4 books that I have that relate to Tom Dooley. It had a real impact on me, and it made a difference in my perspective of what my own personal boundaries were. Tom Dooley was a very sincere physician, went to St. Louis University. He was a missionary doctor, not in a religious sense, but he actually took care of people in Southeast Asia that would give a good running for the Live Aid or the Live 8 that we've seen on television in recent days. He, I think, really developed boundaries beyond himself. And it made me think that there are places other than my own life and my own profession and the very comfortable community that I was living in. He was absolutely instrumental at founding Medico, which became part of Project CARE. He used to, again, have a television show about every 6 months when he would come back on a Sunday night that I used to watch in college to raise money for this. And it changed what I wanted to do, and I made a decision I was going to go into medicine. Medical school was a blast. I must say, it's amazing what 40 years away does to one's memory of the toil of being a medical student and working hard. During medical school, I had been accepted into the internal medicine residency program. And it was for this man that I changed the direction and went over a different boundary. This is Bill DeWeese. He was a remarkable gentleman and a phenomenal surgeon. Bill DeWeese did the first aortocoronary bypass in a dog, an experimental model. He did the first aortorenal bypass in a human here at this hospital. And he also was the first to develop a sieve in the vena cava to prevent pulmonary emboli, something that Laser Greenfield has certainly made into a real life-saving intervention with his device. He had some words of boundaries too, and they were, it's not only what you do, but it's the way you do it. And I think that he got it right. It was an important boundary. My surgical training was waylaid by 2 years when I was in the Army. This was the beginning of the Vietnamese conflict, and I wore khaki greens, not the green scrubs in the operating room. I never saw Nam, but I served on the command staff of a phenomenal soldier. And he was an illustrious military leader in our country. This is a back row of him next to the man in black. He certainly wasn't as in shape as I was, and this was the same year I entered the service after my internship. His name was William Harris. He was a 2-star general. He was a terror in the sense that he was almost like Patton. He really, I think, made a difference to all the troops that were under his command. He led the longest sustained drive in U.S. military history, the lower part of the pincher move with the invasion of Incheon that ended the Korean conflict. He was a great leader, and the one thing he imparted with me was not sort of his hawkish views of the military, but pride in this country. Every day, for the 35 or more years that Nancy and I have owned a home in Ann Arbor, without exception, we've had an American flag flying outside our house. And to say that we're proud Americans would be, I think, a real understatement. I went back to wanting to be a surgeon. I'm not sure you can read this, but I imagine the life of a surgeon can be very rewarding. Obviously, you have saved many lives of many people. Is that what led you to become a surgeon? No, I just like the little green booties. Not illogical for why some people like the persona, I guess, of becoming a surgeon. During my residency, I had a number of people who really defined boundaries, and I want to talk about these 5. The first is Gardner Child, who is the chair. Gardner had me for 11 months. I was on Gardner Child service more than any resident before or after, and I survived, which is remarkable. He had a statement that I had heard when I was a junior resident before I had to assist him. Doctor, stop, think, how can you help me, not hinder me? And that was pretty terrifying. In fact, I would view that as somewhat abusive in this day and age. But I'll tell you, I heard it enough that when I started assisting him the last 2 years of my residency, I thought. I mean, I became a nerd. I thought so much. But you know, it worked. He gave me my first real job, and he hired me here at the university. The second person is Jimmy Crudup. Jimmy Crudup worked in Detroit. His sister was an aide here at the hospital. There was a wildcat strike, and Jimmy came up here to put bread and butter on his table and got a part-time job as a custodian in the laboratory with Dr. Child, and at that time Dr. Zeideman, who were doing surgical research on portal hypertension. And he cleaned up after the mess. And one day they asked him if he would scrub in and hold a retractor, and a couple of weeks later they asked him if he'd cut a suture. And sooner or later, Jimmy ended up being their first assistant, and by the time he finished, Jimmy was an accomplished surgeon. Certainly equal talent of any of us in this room. Jimmy had a record for doing a kidney transplant in a rat in something like 17 or 18 minutes. This guy was really good. And it really put some things in perspective to me. It taught me that the boundaries that you're born with or the boundaries that you're raised with can be overcome and you can go through them. And I think that's important for all of us to remember. Our Outstanding Resident Research Award every year in this department is now given with the title of the Jimmy Crudup Award. So he had an impact, and it's a lasting impact. Now there are two schools of thought, I made a comment that got quoted in the equivalent of our hospital star. I said, when Jimmy Crudup says, doctor, I was thinking, everybody stops and listens. And the reason is if you're operating on a dog or a monkey or something, and he says, doctor, I was thinking, that means you're about ready to get in real trouble. And you usually want to stop and listen to him. It's sort of like E.F. Hutton's My Broker, if you remember these TV ads where everybody stopped when the golfers, somebody said, my broker's E.F. Hutton. This got picked up by one of the news media and ended up in the Palm Beach News as a feature article with a nice photograph of Jimmy. So he was a real person, and people listened to him. And they listened to him because of the quality of his thoughts. Now there's two schools of medicine. This is actually a cartoon in science, which we don't have anymore, but there used to be cartoons in science, which I think equaled the cartoons in the New Yorker. The top says, treat the patient, not the disease. That's the clinician in us. And the bottom one says, treat the disease, not the patient. That's the research laboratory investigator in us. This is a man who had another great deal of influence with me. He was the one that made me the chief of our division of vascular surgery. There were many senior people, but he picked me, and I'm grateful, Jerry, for your having done that. Jerry told me one time, you know, you can really pay a lot of time taking care of the clinical patient, but when you're starting to write about the disease. And I want to go through 4 little boundaries that were personal boundaries that I think I came really close to getting over. The first one was the characterization of really renal arterial fibrodysplasias. These are an unusual group of diseases. I see one of my patients smiling in the audience, so I won't make any. I can't look at this person because of HIPAA rules. But this is a disease that tends to affect the more gentler sex. And we wrote a lot of papers. Over 100 papers and chapters in my CV have been written on this topic. And this was a benchmark. This was a benchmark 25 years ago, and it hasn't changed. This happens to be one of the plates from one of the publications that we published showing the classification of these diseases, and it stood the test of time. I had some wonderful mentors with this. The first was Bill Fry, who was absolutely one of the most intuitive surgeons I think I've ever seen or worked with. And Dr. Fry actually started doing end-to-end anastomoses when he would hook up a graft to a renal artery, and before that time people were doing end to side, and no one would ever cut out a segment of the renal artery. They didn't have a clue what the vessel looked like. So all of a sudden we had a lot of tissue to look at, and we really, I think, made an impact, and at least one that's been lasting. The second person was Cal Ernst. Cal had the energy, and I've said it before in a different forum, smaller group. I've written one perfect paper in my life. It's about 2.5 pages long, and Cal Ernst and I fought over every sentence in it. And I've told people, if you really want to see how weird professors are, you should have seen us going at that. And you know, there are other, Hemingway used to have a bottle of booze and go sit in his room and worry about writing one perfect sentence. We actually worried about each sentence. But Cal had the energy to do that, and I think he made a much better person for me. And the last is this individual who's not part of our faculty, but is about as true blue as any of us. This is Ralph Straffen. Ralph went to undergraduate school here, medical school, did a urology residency here, and was really one of the premier renovascular surgeons in the country, and was a great person to respond to the thoughts that I had about reclassifying this disease, and was very helpful. Ralph also was captain of the 1950 football team, president of the Marion College of Surgeons, and in my mind, I think is one of the most distinguished alums that this school has had. Unfortunately, he passed away recently. The second boundary that I was involved with was trying to make small grafts not clot when they're made out of a material, made out of Dacron or Teflon, to try to get an antithrombotic vascular graft. And we did that by endothelial seedings, endothelial cells being those lining cells in a blood vessel that's healthy, that really sort of prevents clot from forming. And we wrote a lot of papers on that, close to 100 papers. We had continuous NIH funding for almost 2 decades on that. And it was pretty remarkable. This white colored graft is one that's been seeded with endothelial cells, and there's no red clot on it. I mean, this was a phenomenal observation. If we could make a hybrid graft with this, it would really make a big difference when we don't have any other way of doing some kind of a bypass in the patient. The person that took the lead on this was Linda Graham. This is a photograph from her residency. She was first author on the initial paper that came from our lab. Linda subsequently joined our faculty. She's now at the Cleveland Research Foundation Institute, and she and her husband are both doing significant work on vascular grafts to this day, and Linda's been funded by NIH for a better part of 25 years. Most importantly, Linda was the first and the only woman president of the Society of University Surgeons, and I think Michigan should be really proud of that. That's a bastion of male chauvinism, and for a woman that's about 5'2" to have that position and have it because of her recognized credentials, I think really reflects well on all of us. These are 2 graphs, and you can see the thickened area on one and the thinner area on the other. This is a scanning electron microphotograph. It looks like a bunch of little small ping pong balls on the one, which are platelets, which are the harbingers of an evolving thrombus, and the other is the smooth endothelial lining. And we know these are endothelial cells, not something else. This is a factor 8 immunofluorescent, factor 9 immunofluorescence, which is very unique to the endothelial cell. And this was pretty important work at that time. The third, and the next to the last boundary that I think I've been part of, is looking at the toxicity of protamine, a molecule. It's a plus 21 charged molecule. It is a very polycationic molecule. It is toxic as can be. The only place it exists is in the head of sperm, in male sperms in adult humans, in the salmon sperm where it's derived for our clinical use. And it's there to break up the membrane during the fertilization process, but it is really toxic. And we recognize that. If you give it too fast, patients will crash and they'll die. A lot of papers were written on that. Most importantly, 4 patents were obtained on that work, and Tom Wakefield was the lead person on that. We haven't realized commercial return from that, but when we do, I'm sure Tom's smile will be much, much bigger than this. But that was the third boundary. And this is another cartoon from Science, and you may not be able to read this. It says, "It disturbs me that so many of today's young people go into medicine for the money. In my time, the chance to play God was enough." You know, I've really never considered playing God, but it has a lot of distinct possibilities. And actually, the potential of that came close with gene therapy. And gene therapy was in the rage at this institution back in the mid-90s or mid-80s. Vascular surgery and myself owned 1/5 of a very large project that Bill Kelly had structured related to gene transfer for human diseases at that time. And all of this ended up with a lot of these publications. The seminal publication being from this woman, Betsy Nabel, who I think is just one of the more phenomenal individuals that I've ever worked with or known. Betsy, as Tom mentioned, is currently the head of Heart and Lung Blood Institute, the National Institutes of Health. And she had been the head of cardiology here. And Betsy was one of my closest friends in the laboratory and professionally when she was on our faculty here, and was really one of the people that helped us put together the idea of a cardiovascular center and a vascular medicine program. The photographs from that paper in Science, which had no p-values and had really very few few subjects where material was looked at is this. This is an artery that sort of looks sort of blah, sort of gray. There's nothing there, the structure of some cells. And the next is what the vessel looked like when we had done the gene transfer. And the blue is beta-galactosidase. It's an X-gal stain of it. And the gene for beta-galactosidase was the gene that we had transferred in. And it doesn't seem very remarkable now, but this is the first time anybody had shown you could do gene transfer in a living animal up walking around and have it express, have the protein made. There have been many studies done with cells in organ culture and like, but never in a real animal. So this is pretty profound. And we did a lot of other studies after that. This is just another example of the same protein being expressed in a normal vessel in one of our experimental animals. Now, there have been a lot of boundary setters in my more senior years, and I want to comment about some of them. They are major players in what I consider a team that identifies the boundaries and tells you, do you want to play in bounds, or wouldn't it be fun to get out of bounds? The first one is Laser Greenfield. Laser, with his cable filter design that he was really responsible for, has been responsible for saving more lives than all of the faculty in this hospital added up together for a couple decades. There are hundreds of thousands of people's lives who've been saved because of the greenfield filter being put in. Not a small accomplishment. And I think Laser should be very proud of that. I'm very proud that he created the Section of Vascular Surgery and didn't give us quite equal stature with our parent general surgery, but at least we're junior siblings with the parent general surgery that we had before. A phenomenal person when he was chair here. And these men have played a significant role. There are two vice presidents in this. On either end, George Zeidema and Gil Oman on one side, on the other end. George Zeidema, way over on your far right, was my mentor when I was a junior student. Gave me the keys to the surgical lab where I first learned how to make an incision in an animal, not in a human being. And Gil Oman, I can tell you, we would not have the Cardiovascular Center at the stage of construction that it's in right now. It would still be in the architect's drawing someplace if Gil hadn't gone to the plate for us and pushed pretty hard to have that happen. And this young man, who is now my boss, I must say something about Mike Mulholland. I think he is a very committed intellect that this institution is very, very lucky to have. Mike thinks all the time. I swear he roams the boundaries, looking for something that'll make things better. And we don't always go outside, but if anybody looks for change that'll make this institution better, surgical sciences, medical sciences, the whole show, I think Mike's done it. I think we're very, very lucky to have him on board. There are two people outside this institution that to me as a senior physician have made a big difference. The first is Stanley Crawford. Stanley Crawford was a Texan who had a drawl, who sort of would disarm you. He was trained at Harvard. He usually didn't tell you that. You thought he was just a Houston Texan. He really changed the way people are treated with thoracoabdominal aneurysms. And he took patients that were terribly ill, that had very high mortality rates. And he did an operation. I'm sure the first time people thought about it, they would have said, you're crazy. You cut the aorta open from up in the chest all the way down to the lower abdomen, and now you're going to put a graft on the inside of it when you got it open. Made no sense. One of his mentors, DeBakey, always did a bypass and took a bunch of grafts off of it to all these important vessels in your abdomen. It looked like an octopus. And Crawford didn't do that. He put a graft in the middle, cut little holes, reimplanted the vessels. I think he really changed my mind about how we view patients that are critically ill. I think we as physicians have a covenant with patients that are really critically ill to go the extra yard, to do something, not to take a risk with them unnecessarily, but do something that'll make a difference. And Crawford's the guy that really did it for vascular surgery. And this person, I don't believe very many of you in the room know who he is. This is Julius Jacobson, Jack Jacobson. He's at the other end of the spectrum. Even though he grew up in the Midwest and actually went to college in Toledo, he's a Hopkins guy and he's lived in New York City. I think he is one of the real intellects in vascular surgery. He is an umpteen times millionaire because he really brought microvascular surgery into the arena and owned the patents on most of the instruments that anybody would be using today. He's very cultured. I actually really love this guy. He is a major philanthropist. And I will never have the resources he has, but I will tell you, my heart's exactly where his is. He is committed and endowed things like the Jacobson Award that Bob Bartlett received from our institution for his ECMO studies, $50,000 a year. Big endowment to give you that kind of income. He's endowed the initiatives program that the vascular surgery community enjoys with NIH every springtime. This guy's made out of the right thing. The other thing I really like about him is he likes music. There's a lot of discussion about distractions in the operating room, but the title of this is, studies suggest music helps steady hand of surgeons, and the guy sticks his hand out and says Pink Floyd's Dark Side of the Moon. I went through adolescence when I was in adolescence, but I love classical music, and I sort of get razzed a little bit about it. I like it enough that when people say, what's going on with the big three, I don't think about the automotive industry. I think about this medical center, the athletic department, and the University Musical Society. They are big deals for this community. And he had the same approach in New York. And Jack, 2 years ago, wrote a book called The Classic Music Experience. It's a copy that I have that he gave to me. And Kevin Kline lives in his building in New York in Midtown Manhattan and narrated the 2 CDs with this. It's somewhat sophomoric. I've given it to a lot of my faculty to try to bring culture into our institution. And to be honest with you, I'm not sure that it's going to work. It's still an experiment evolving. And my only comment is, it's really hard to stamp out country music. It just doesn't go away. But this was a man who I think represents the spectrum of an intellect who's a technician, who's really a very good surgeon, and obviously been a very good friend of mine. Now there's some other people. They're the women, and I just comment about them. Nancy has been my sonar system. She usually lets me know when I'm approaching a boundary that I shouldn't approach, and I will tell you, everybody needs that. Sarah, on the other hand, is a risk taker. Sarah's comment is, Dad, just go for it. I mean, who else would pick up a phone and say, Dad, you can get in the lottery for the 100th Boston Marathon when you're 40 pounds overweight. Say, Dad, why don't you do it? But these have been important people to break boundaries and set boundaries for me. There's another person that you heard about earlier. This is Carolyn Jobst, phenomenal woman, one of the earlier women in business by herself in a competitive environment who was successful, developed the Jobst company. Her husband died 3 years after it was founded, make all these elastic support stockings that many of us use, sold it for $90 million and wanted to do something to commemorate her husband and her love for her husband, and gave us a very large gift to establish the Jobst Vascular Research Laboratories, a legacy that's going to outlive Carolyn and me and Tom Wakefield and all of us. Something that's allowed us to get through boundaries that we honestly couldn't have done before. A pretty neat lady. And my nurses. These happen to be the 3 nurses, Becky and Charlene and Elaine, who are on our service, especially Char Menard's been a phenomenal supporter. Char not only breaks down boundaries for my patients, she puts them up occasionally when I'm getting in trouble to keep myself from being hurt. The nurses in the OR, the nurses up on the floor, they don't build statues to nurses, but they really should. These are special people, and they're wonderful people at our institution. And this individual, this is my secretary, Duana Billamir. We were a lot younger when this photograph was taken. Duana's sort of been my office confidant for almost 2.5 decades. She is professional, she's efficient, and she's very loyal. She also knows a lot more about me and my shortcomings than I want my chairman to know, so I treat her with a great deal of respect. But she's very special, and anybody in this institution should be so fortunate to have a co-worker like I've had her for so many years. She's loyal, and I will tell you, I'm very beholden to her, and I'm very loyal to her in return. And then there's today's boundary, the Cardiovascular Center that you've heard about, led by these 4 people. They're a very, very well-endowed group with Linda Laren as our administrative chief. They're trying to break the boundary to put away some of the serious problems facing our nation, especially Michigan. We're 7th from the bottom of the list with cardiovascular disease. Kim Eagle, who I think, is a wonderful clinical cardiologist. He's a phenomenal, thoughtful person, when it comes to sorting out data from large populations and risk management. Rich Prager, who if I had a dog tag on, it would say, if I got chest pain and you find me by the street, take me to this guy. He's the surgeon's surgeon. If I need a cardiac procedure done next couple of days, Rich is the guy to do it. And this man, who is really a gem of an intellect, David Pinsky, is the head of cardiology here. I think David is one of the truly great intellectual leaders that we have at this institution today, and he's a very mature scientist. I personally think the CVC and this institution's future are in great hands with these people. I actually think intellect's important. I think also Eke and Meek got it right. You know, winning isn't everything, you know. One shouldn't confuse victory with success or speech with intelligence. I won't comment about any of the current political situations, but it does be nice when you hear somebody that really articulates something that's really meaningful. And I've had some very intelligent people that I've worked with. These are my faculty partners. The ones that are headed up by Tom are the current people that I work with. The others are people that have been here or have retired. And I will tell you, any institution in the country that has somebody like this working for them would be a very proud institution. And my vascular fellows. Our vascular fellows, some of you have heard me say this before, always this cliche, isn't it wonderful? We've got all these giants whose shoulders we stand on so we can get a better view. I've always said, find some bright young people, they'll lift you up and they'll give you a better vision over the boundary than trying to find the occasional giant. You may not find them, but there are a lot of bright young people around that you can work with. And of course, there's David Andleman, my benefactor. David's a very rare human being. He's someone we really should all wish we had in our family. He's smart and he's humble, he's very approachable and he's nice and he's obviously very generous. This is a poem that our section gave to David a number of years ago, and I want to read it. An old man traveling a lone highway arrived at the evening cold and gray to a gorge vast, deep and wide. The old man crossed in the twilight dim, the swollen stream had no fears for him. He paused when safe on the other side to build a bridge to span the tide. Old man, said a traveler near, you're wasting our might building here. Your journey will end at the dying day. You'll never again return this way. You've crossed this gorge deep and wide. Why build this bridge at twilight tide? The old man lifted his gentle gray head. Good friend, in the path I chose, he said, there followeth after me today youth whose feet must come this way. This gorge that has not been naught to me, to fair-headed youth may a deadfall be. They too must cross it in the twilight dim. Good friend, the old man said, this bridge I built for them. David, thank you for building a very important bridge for us at this university. And there's Nancy Stanley, my wife, and really everything else. Just use your imagination and think how lucky I've been for nearly a half a century to be at her side. She's really been there to define and made most of my life's boundaries a frontier of wonder and happiness. And I love her. Lastly, to paraphrase a recent sentiment, I just want to remind you all of what you've seen today. This is a cliche you're going to hear a lot of in a couple months. It's not about the research, and it's not about an individual physician or doctor. It's about working together as a team. And in these times, that's the Michigan difference. David, thank you. Godspeed to all of us. Thank you. Thank you.